So it looks like Scott did join the call. Thanks for joining, Scott. So we're going to go ahead and start since we're 4 minutes in. If you haven't been with us before, feel free to put your name in the chat with your contact information, or if you have, you can give everyone a fresh reminder. This is just 30 minutes, so we are going to get smarter in 30 minutes. Isn't that exciting? But we have 3 reminders. Reminder number 1. We are happy to report out that we now have a bill. Steve Yeager has introduced our bill. It is AB 341. Pretty cool number, easy for folks like us to remember. And you can look at it online. You can read it if you'd like. It's kind of boring, but feel free. We still have some amendments to make and a long process to go, but it's great news. Our next meeting will be in person. So we are so excited to get back in person. It is going to be at 7th and Carson on the 2nd Thursday of the month, which is April 8th. It's going to start at 5, doors open at 4:20. We'll have appetizers, drinks, and hopefully an extremely exciting special guest. We are going to announce, put a graphic up for that tomorrow, and members will have first priority, and it is $25, and that includes your drink, your tip, and your food. So Thursday the 8th. And then last announcement, we have really an exciting event coming up, the Lemon Haze Golf Tournament at Bears Best on April 28th in the morning, followed by a social. It is for owners, operators, executives. It is put on by Mr. Brian Yeager of the Lemon Haze company, and he's been awesome. He's a gold member with us, so we really appreciate him coming into this market and just supporting everything. We are privileged to be able to run the raffle and then earn more money for the chamber. So we are looking for pretty cool raffle prizes, hotel rooms, spa packages, show tickets. And what we're hoping is that some of our members would really donate a package. So let's say the higher source wanted to donate 2 nights at the Cosmo and a dinner at STK, and that package was from you. Now we can take your donation and make even more money with it. So we will be sending out an email to all of our members if you'd like to take advantage of that, but it'll be a fun way to enjoy the day and raise some money for the chamber. So that's all the announcements I got. We're going to turn it over to Scott, our political advisor and now lobbyist from Argentum Partners, to teach us a little bit more about the Nevada Legislature and how organizations like ours really can impact change. So without further ado, Scot Rutledge.
Thank you for that introduction, Tina. Hope everyone's doing well this evening. I apologize for being late. I was just watching the Assembly Committee hearing on AB 322. That is, as some of you are aware, the Cannabis Vendor and Event Bill. It's proposes some new license types and a new way to approach cannabis events in a legal way and actually allow for some new business opportunities. That bill hearing had a big recess in the middle. The legislature right now is kind of nuts. They're bouncing between committee to floor to back, and it's a process. So long story short, we are about midway through the Nevada legislature. And this is unlike any other Nevada legislative session that I or anybody I've worked with has been a part of. In some ways, there's some value that it's been a remote session, and it is allowing for individuals to participate almost in a more equitable way, because as you all know, if you're in Southern Nevada, you're probably not spending much time up in Carson City going to hearings and whatnot. Now everybody's testifying by phone. And so that's kind of interesting. I wanted to tonight give you just a quick overview of how the Nevada legislative process works. I've put together a basic handout that the chamber will share with you all so you can see. And then I also wanted to give you just a couple of quick updates. One on our Cannabis Consumption Lounge Bill, AB 341. But just for you all to be aware, Steve Yeager, Assemblyman Yeager's other piece of legislation that the chamber has prioritized this session, cannabis DUI, was introduced today, and it is going to be heard this Monday morning in Assembly Judiciary. I'm going to be testifying on behalf of the chamber and its members in support of that legislation. I'll be speaking with Tina and some of the other executive committee more about that. I think it's an opportunity for some of you who want to weigh in on that bill and in the affirmative. There will be an option to do that. We'll get you information. There's also a way to just submit written comments in support if you can't attend that hearing. And those comments, by the way, written, are as equally of value as testifying over the phone, just so you don't feel like you have to do public testimony. And then our bill on the cannabis consumption lounges will be hopefully heard by next week. But again, as Tina mentioned, we're still in the process of making some amendments and working through some details. But I did speak with Assemblyman Yeager yesterday, and he's hoping to get the bill heard possibly Friday of next week, but it could go to the next week. So, but that will be heard in his committee, Assembly Judiciary, which meets Monday, Wednesday, Fridays at 8 a.m. So that's the status of the two bills that we've prioritized. Now you're asking yourself, well, how does this whole thing work, right? And for those of you who are not familiar with Nevada's legislative process, there's a lot that goes into getting a bill introduced. And you guys have pretty much participated in that process thus far. It begins with developing relationships with legislators, i.e. Assemblyman Steve Yeager, and letting them know as constituents and as a community what you'd like to see. And then working with them to come up with a concept and coming up with some policy outlines. And then you submit that language to the Legislative Counsel Bureau, basically the legislative attorneys who draft legislation. And they put together their best attempt at what the intent of the policy outline that we've provided is. And then you get a bill introduced. Our bill was introduced last week on the Assembly floor and was referred to the Assembly Judiciary Committee. Once that happens, it can happen rather quickly. In the case of the DUI bill, it was introduced on the floor today and will be heard in committee on Monday. That bill, when you review it, very simple bill, just eliminates a couple things in the DUI statute related to cannabis. It's a very elegant fix. So that's why a bill like that can move more quickly than, say, a more complex piece of legislation like cannabis consumption lounges, where we have to really consider a lot of different statutes. It's not a singular statute issue. And when I say statute, I mean the part of the Nevada revised statutes, our state law, where you have, a bill might in trying to change the law, you might in fact be needing to change several parts of the law. And so we have to point to those various components of the statute. So all of that goes into crafting good legislation. So once it is presented in committee, where amendments can be taken, and you also have public testimony. And so what that means is that when the bill is heard, generally you have an amendment that would be considered supportive, and that you've worked with the bill sponsor, and they may even introduce that amendment as their own, but it's considered a helpful amendment. And those are generally based on conversations leading up to that hearing. You might also have what are considered hostile amendments, or amendments that change the intent of the bill that have not been approved by the bill sponsor. But the important thing to know about that first committee hearing is that is where public testimony is taken. It's also where the bill is presented. And it can take sometimes up to an hour to walk through the details of a piece of legislation. I will be presenting the Cannabis Consumption Lounge bill along with Assemblyman Yeager next week, hopefully, if not the following. And we're going to have Tyler Klimas from the CCB. He'll be there participating. I don't think he's going to provide testimony as much as he's going to be there to answer questions. We know where the CCB stands on their desire to regulate these new license types, and that they want to work on this issue. So they're going to be there to answer questions, because so much of the legislation points to the CCB. In addition to that, we'll have, again, ability for folks to call in and provide public testimony over the phone. So that's where we can hear from some of you. We'll talk a little bit more about that once I finish walking through the process here, because I do want to come back. So we're going to put a pin in public testimony. The next step is that the same committee, once hearing the bill, they're likely never going to vote on the bill that first time they hear it, right? It's occasionally it can happen, but that really doesn't happen. It goes to work session. Once it's in work session, amendments can then be adopted. So, there might be a do pass as amended motion for that amended legislation. There is no public testimony during the work session. It is literally just the legislators meeting with the bill sponsor. The bill sponsor may invite a presenter to be there as well, or they may invite other agency folks to be there to speak, where they have questions as it relates to revenue, taxes, et cetera. Once that bill is passed out of the committee, it goes back to the assembly floor, where it is read on the floor. If there are additional amendments that need to be worked out, the bill can be passed, amended, do passed on the floor, or it can be passed as it was amended coming out of committee. Then it is sent over to the other chamber. And so in this case, it would go to the Senate. Then the Senate's going to go through the same process as in the Assembly. Once it's finished that process, and if it passes that House without amendments, without any changes, it can then be sent to the governor for approval or for a veto. If there are amendments in the second House, then the bill has to be referred back to the first House in order for it to be voted on again. They basically have to concur with the changes that were made in the other House. Generally, it doesn't get amended again and sent back. So the opportunity to really impact the bill takes place in two committee meetings. The first committee meeting in the first House and the second committee meeting in the second House. And then, of course, all the stuff that happens in between, or what we like to call the sausage making process. So at that point, I'll stop. And in terms of the process, are there any questions about the process before we talk a little bit about public testimony? I'm seeing if there are any questions in the comments.
I have a question, Scott.
Yes.
When I envision, if we were at the legislature, I always envision like lobbyists around their door, just like trying to chase them down. Like, excuse me, Assemblyman, excuse me, Assemblywoman. Could you kind of tell us where the lobbyists and political affairs agency, like, when do you talk to them? Are you coming to Steve with donuts? Like, what are you doing?
So in fact, Assemblyman Yeager likes to provide donuts for the building. And he's had, I think, for 2 sessions now, what's called the Yeager donut wall. And people will bring donuts, or his staff will buy donuts, or he'll buy donuts, and they'll hang them up on a wall in his office. To the point of how do I do my job? In a normal session, I would be up in Carson City, walking the halls, waiting in the lobbies, as it were. And that's why the term lobbyist is what it is, to meet with them. And now we're doing it all virtually. So it's done over the phone, or scheduled through a Zoom meeting. Meeting with legislators this session has been relegated to all virtual for now, and that may not change. So I think that, classic cannabis salesman. Nice, Maggie. I think that, in terms of how I do my work, it's a little different than the way the public may do that, because generally the public are going to show up for committee hearings and testify in public. They may not always meet with the legislator in their office, or before or after hours, or whatever time you can find. So that's why a lot of associations, companies, nonprofits, organizations hire people like myself. I have a team that I work with. Argentum Partners has a number of associates that work with our partners. And I think we probably have 8 or 9 folks working this session. I have members of my staff working on assisting me with some of the amendments, doing research. We'll have folks talking to different legislators. We'll divide the work up. But our job is to do all the things that generally you don't have time to do, right? You have day jobs. My day job is to do this.
Hold on.
So on that point, does anybody else have any questions about the work or the process? Okay. If you do, please send something in chat. My email is also at the bottom of this document, and you can send emails, inquiries directly to me. Now, in terms of public testimony, this session, because of the limitations, most committee chairs are trying to keep testimony within 30 minutes. For the affirmative, offer the same for negative, and then they do neutral. That's the order of how testimony is taken. The affirmative, opposition, and then neutral. If you are going to provide public testimony and you do not support the bill as written, then technically you would be in opposition of the bill, but you would offer up amendment or offer that you're going to be working with the bill sponsor to try to make some changes so that hopefully you can be in support. Those positions of opposition, they can be taken by individuals, but generally what you'll see is that those positions are taken by organizations or associations that have a concern about how it might impact them. So I think that's where, you know, a lot of people, when it comes to the legislative process, to demystify it for you, you do have a role as the public, you do have a role as an individual to testify and support. I would recommend the following in terms of how to be effective. Number one, because of the short time limits, there's a 2-minute time limit right now on all testimony. I would suggest having testimony that does not go over 1 minute. I would not spend a lot of time being biographical in your testimony. You're just simply stating your name, and if you're involved with an organization is fine. You don't need to give the details about what that organization or association does. A lot of people like to do that, but it cuts into the time where you could be providing some sort of, you know, comment that is going to maybe help shape or color the legislation, or might provide some information that one of those members of the committee didn't have prior. Another important thing to note about providing testimony is that if somebody has already said what you were planning on saying, then simply give your name, your association if you have one, and note that I just want to note that I agree with the comments made by so-and-so. We call it the Me Too testimony. It is not imperative that you take up a lot of time if the things you wanted to say have already been said. By simply confirming or concurring with what was already said, that is as important. I do think that, you know, in the case of if you have some sort of personal story or component, that can be useful depending on the context of the legislation. Generally, pieces of legislation that revolve around business development, business opportunity, I don't necessarily think that a personal, compelling story can be as helpful as more of a if you have some data that you think would be helpful to share. I know in the hearing that I was just viewing on AB 322 on the vendor bill, I thought it was great that some of the testimony really focused on how there have been a disproportionate number of licenses provided to essentially a very non-diverse or limited amount of current license holders. And that, you know, they were able to point to all the data and statistics that we are well aware of now that the CCB has put in their report about the lack of diversity, how Nevada does not have a social equity component to our cannabis laws. And so to hear a little bit of, you know, I was personally affected by this, and if I have a chance to participate in this industry, I would like to, and this bill provides licenses that may be my best chance. Saying something as simple as that will resonate as much as trying to explain what that experience you may have had looked like. Again, Everybody has their own style, but I think in interest of time, and trust me, as this session continues on and the amount of work these legislators are faced with, brevity is actually a very positive thing, and it is looked on kindly by these members who oftentimes might not have had a chance to eat that day, and here it is 7 p.m., and they're trying to, or maybe they have other things they need to get to. So again, it's not, I would never tell anybody not to speak their truth, not to say what they want to say, but I will tell you that I would advise you to try to follow some of that advice in doing this, especially if you've not done it before, because I think that it will be appreciated not only by those committee members, but by the bill sponsor, whom you're there trying to support what they're doing. So I'll stop again and see if anybody has any questions.
Oh, me again on the question, Scott. We have 5 minutes, but can you then explain to our members, once we get this bill passed, then what happens after that?
Yes. So in a bill like this, where we are going to have to promulgate regulations at the CCB, so the board and staff at the CCB will need to hold public workshops, to consider a number of the components of this legislation. There is going to be likely 2 to 3 months worth of work on this after the session, could even extend to further out. In addition, you have local ordinances that need to be drafted and passed for any jurisdiction that wants to provide this type of licensing. The city of Las Vegas, I worked on that ordinance in 2019. The fact that they refer to these lounges as venues, they're going to have to change the language in their ordinance to conform with the new state law. And because there will be changes made in how what the law provides for and other things, they're going to have to conform their existing ordinance with that. And plus, you've got what's going to come through the regulatory process. And then you have, for example, like the Clark County Commission, they do not have an ordinance for this. They're going to have to start from scratch and put something together. So the time frame for all of that could pretty much take up the rest of this year. I think a very conservative time frame for when the CCB would issue an application window for these provisional licenses, probably Q1 of next year. Could be earlier, but I think Q1 of next year would be a pretty good time frame. Once they issue provisional, as most of you are familiar with cannabis licensing, you've got to go get your land use approved. You've got to get, all of that sorted out at the local level, and then checking all the boxes to finally get your final approval. So I would be surprised to see any venues open prior to Q3 of next year, but theoretically you could see some opening up in Q2 if they've got a lot of stuff already built out and are ready to go. My point is, be patient with the process. Something this transformational with this much attention to detail is going to require a lot of time, and we need to be thoughtful. I think that, to Bree's point, she asked, can you speak on the impact and power of the fact that this bill creates equity language, which is being echoed in AB 322? And that is a good thing. One of the reasons why the vendor bill was being held up, there were a lot of legal changes that needed to take place. But one of the considerations that the CCB asked the bill sponsor to look at was that in our bill for consumption lounges, that we kept the definition for social equity applicant very simple, and then point to the CCB to then extrapolate that out. And I think through a public hearing process and public workshops, we can really get to the meat of like, what kind of benefits and opportunity do we want to provide for social equity applicants? That's not something that I think should exist in statute. I think when you put it in regulation, it gives you a chance to do things, and if it doesn't work, you can fix it. If you do it in statute, you've got to wait 2 years. So a lot of the components of this legislation, we are intentionally moving it to the regulators. And by the way, the regulators want that. In our consultations with them, they are happy to do that. There was a question here, how are we dealing with the gaming issue? Quite frankly, we're not right now. I mean, look, we're going to get the bill draft completed. We're going to continue to work on those amendments. Once we have what we are comfortable with, then yeah, we will start communicating with the gaming lobbyists, the industry. We know in the past they have not been supportive of this. And I think that there's some things have changed that I hope will have impacted their thinking. Last time we were trying to pass a bill, or we had an ordinance at the city, but there was no CCB. And I don't think people were necessarily confident that the Department of Taxation could do its job in regulating this new type of license and this new effort. So I think that with a CCB in place that's modeled after the gaming regulators and the way they do things and the enforcement component and a lot of other things that are sort of out there that we don't have control over, but they're those sort of variables that exist around the process. A lot of things have changed since 2019. So I do feel confident that we can have some very robust and productive conversations with gaming, law enforcement, and others whom we need to continue to work with on this. And another question, what about the adjacent boutique hotels? I think that to be very clear, the lack of specificity in the lounge bill in terms of what type of venue or lounge license, how you apply your lounge license to what kind of venue you want to do, we're leaving that intentionally open. We think that the best way to do this is to allow the creativity of entrepreneurs and the people that are seeing opportunities to do things. They're going to have to simply, any one of these businesses is going to have to do three things. They're going to have to get approved in their application to the CCB. They're going to have to get their land use approved at the local level, right? And then they're going to have to go back and get all the final approvals from the CCB and open and operate. So, but I think that we wanted to maintain a general vagueness in what a lounge would look like or what it could be, just so that we could, give everybody the most amount of opportunity to come up with their ideas and concepts. 7:31, Tina, how's that?
Cool. You're getting good. Usually our calls are long.
Brevity, right? We're practicing brevity. I could have probably stopped a little sooner, but Maggie's got all the great questions tonight.
Yeah,
so.
these are great questions. And if there's any other questions, you can always reach out to us and we can reach out to Scott. So we appreciate everyone being on the call. Just reassuring everyone that everything is going well and we're all where we need to be doing exactly what we should be doing. So thank you guys for all your support, and hopefully we'll see many of you at the in-person meeting on Thursday, April 8th at 7th and Carter.